Thank you, Kate, and thank you to Terry for the invitation to come and speak with you this morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm not sure if I'm the only one in the room who sees a delicious irony in somebody from the Australian government talking to you just after Tiffany. I guess a few others see that irony as well. These are challenging times for the Great Barrier Reef, and the job of protecting the reef and the marine park is more difficult than it has ever been before. And difficult and challenging times bring the need for difficult and challenging decisions. There's been quite a lot of controversy about some of the directions being taken with protection of the reef in recent months, and I'm quite deliberately going to touch on at least a couple of those controversial issues in this talk. My desire is genuinely to spark conversation with you from the centre, so I'd be delighted for those of you who are interested to follow up with me over lunch or over the next couple of days. So we've said for at least 20 years now that there are four major threats to the Great Barrier Reef, but climate change is emerging as, without doubt, the greatest threat, not into the future, but right here, right now. And although we have said, again, for many years, that there are several sources of threat to the reef from the various elements of climate change and ocean change, it is clearly the top three that are representing a clear and present danger that we are already seeing. It's not theory if we just look at the sequence of extreme weather events since about 1998. It's a very impressive list. So 10 severe category tropical cyclones, a period between 2009 and 2012 when I lost count of how many times the media told me we had just had a 1-in-100-year flood. And of course, most confrontingly and most recently, the effects of the two marine heat waves in 2016 and 2017. Now, I don't want to go into the details of the impacts of those heat waves because I know that Terry is speaking after me and he will do a much better job than I ever could. But I want to draw your attention to the recent release from AIMS of an update to their long-term monitoring program. The three graphs all represent coral cover, starting with the northern region at the top, then the central, then the southern. I'm not going to go through this blow by blow, but there's three elements of these trajectories that I want to draw your attention to. All three regions have suffered their lowest ever coral cover in the last few years or right now. Two of the three regions have had the time to show exceptional resilience with very strong recovery rates post those very low points. But most confrontingly of all is the fact that for the first time ever since this monitoring began in 1985, all three regions are in steep decline simultaneously. We have never seen that before, and it is without question a direct consequence of the extreme weather events that we've been seeing. Now, I hasten to add that list of extreme weather events, I can't prove unequivocally that every one of them is caused by climate change. But the pattern of severe floods, severe cyclones, severe heat waves is exactly what we anticipate and forecast with climate change. So, regrettably, the simple truth is more of the Great Barrier Reef is looking something like this. This is severe cyclone damage, but other forms of damage end up in roughly similar results sooner or later. And less of the Great Barrier Reef is looking the way that we are used to. Now, there is still an awful lot of the Great Barrier Reef that does look like this. The Great Barrier Reef Marine Park is bigger than 2/3 of the countries on the planet, so it's a very heterogeneous and diverse place. There are the bright spots, even in the middle of the worst impact areas. Then there are the other areas, particularly the southern third of the park, that at least in the last few years haven't suffered impacts that are too bad. We still have an awful lot of Great Barrier Reef that looks like this, and we need to do more to protect it. One of the things that concerns me the most is the global media's attention on the demise of the Great Barrier Reef, in particular reports of its death. I'm sick of seeing obituaries for the Great Barrier Reef. I don't think it's funny. I think it's wildly irresponsible. The Great Barrier Reef is still an incredibly valuable place. It's part of the Australian national identity. It's an incredibly important part of the spirituality of Australia's First Nations people, the Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders. It's still recognised as a global environmental icon, as one of the 7 wonders of the world and a World Heritage Site. It is still an economic powerhouse. It creates almost $6 billion per year in direct economic activity. It supports tens of thousands of jobs, and it supports tens of billions of dollars per year in ecosystem goods and services. And just ask any 8-year-old, it is the inspiration for Finding Nemo. All of that weather that I talked about, all of the impacts that I talked about, the downward trajectories in coral cover, that has all happened in a world that is only approaching 1 degree centigrade warmer. And we know, because we're living in that world, how significant that is, the impacts that it's having, and how difficult it is to adapt management of the system to cope with that change. When we look to the future, and acknowledging that these are the representative concentration pathways from the IPCC 4 years ago now, and we look out to 2050, which is the time horizon of the Australian and Queensland government's plan to protect the Great Barrier Reef, we already see in only 32 years, between the best and the worst of those RCPs, that the best would deliver plus 1.4 and the worst would deliver plus 2.3. I can't predict the future exactly, but I know that something like that is the envelope that represents the operating environment for protecting the Great Barrier Reef in 30 years. Clearly, mitigation is absolutely essential. We need to get as close to the 1.4 or the plus 1.5 of the Paris Agreement as we possibly can. I probably won't be doing this job in the year 2050, or at least I hope not, but if I am, I have got no idea how we're going to cope as managers at plus 2.3. So my first and strongest message is that stronger global adoption of renewable energy, stronger global reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and achievement of the most ambitious elements of the Paris targets is absolutely essential to the future of the Great Barrier Reef. But even if we achieve all of that at plus 1.4, we are collectively going to have our work cut out for us. So we need to start thinking about what does that look like? What does protecting the Great Barrier Reef at plus 1.4 or plus 1.5 actually mean? We have a number of very important plans in place, and they're not just plans on paper. There is substantial funding. There is very strong government commitment. There is very strong industry and community commitment to these plans. So there is the plan to improve water quality on the Great Barrier Reef by improving land catchment management, and that includes some of the very important stuff that Kath spoke about. There is the Queensland government's push for a 10-year program to improve sustainability of fisheries management, including considerations of adapting to climate change and what fisheries management means in a degraded ecosystem. There is, of course, the Great Barrier Reef Zoning Plan, which is the absolute foundation of the Marine Park Authority's protection of the ecosystem. And these things are brought together in the Reef 2050 plan, which was released in 2015. And in my view, this was an important step forward in achieving sound polycentric governance for the Great Barrier Reef. I am not in any way going to tell you that I think that plan was perfect. It was not. But it is a very important step forward. And that plan undergoes regular reviews. It's being reviewed right now. The importance of keeping that plan current and relevant, and in particular making it appropriately consider climate change and what we are going to need to do out to 2050 is essential. Despite all of those endeavours, last year, after the 2 back-to-back bleaching events and Cyclone Debbie, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority convened a Reef Summit. We brought together 70 national and international experts, including some individuals from the centre. And the output of that 2-day summit was what we call our Reef Blueprint. And this is essentially saying, where do we need to go next in protecting the Great Barrier Reef? We've got zoning, we've got fisheries management, we've got catchment management. Those still need to be improved and subject to adaptive management, but what else do we think we can do? The mood in the room was positive in that there was a view that together we can secure the future of the Great Barrier Reef, but we need to try harder, do more, and act now. And that was built on the notion of building a resilience network in which we prioritise the most ecologically functioning, important reefs in the entire marine park, and we prioritise their protection, particularly through enhanced compliance, control of crown of thorn starfish, protecting keystone species, and facilitating restoration. I'm going to talk about a couple more of those in a moment. Together with those 10 specific initiatives has gone some evolution in management thinking. We're thinking more about processes and resilience and ecosystem integrity and function, as well as ecosystem goods and services. And of course, the critical interdependence of the ecosystem goods and services on those biophysical attributes. We're looking more to the future and saying, what do we need in 20 or 30 years' time to protect the reef? And we're thinking more about community and industry adaptation, because communities and industries will adapt no matter what happens. If we do it in a planned way, that could help the reef. If we do it in an unplanned, reactive way, we could deliver perverse adaptation that actually hurts the reef. In April, the government announced substantial new funding for the Great Barrier Reef. So both the Queensland and Australian governments have increased their funding for the field management program of the Marine Park Authority and the Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service. So that is still a 50-50 funded program. That program will almost double in size over the next 4 years, and that will allow us to undertake much stronger work in compliance with the zoning plan, as well as stronger on-ground and on-water conservation work. There was also the announcement of funding for the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, and importantly, this addresses the critical threats to the reef, the local threats, not the global. And from my perspective in particular, the focus on crown of thorn starfish control and reef restoration and adaptation are critical for the future. The Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority already has a very strong partnership with the foundation and has had one for many years. This funding gives us a very strong opportunity to improve that partnership and deliver better outcomes for the Great Barrier Reef into the future. I'm only going to speak very quickly about crown of thorn starfish control, but it is of growing importance in our management of the park, particularly because, thanks to the work of Morgan Pratchett and his team, we've been able to make the manual control of crown of thorn starfish 4 to 5 times more effective than it has been in the past. Nonetheless, at the moment where we are is at the peak of an outbreak. There are many millions of starfish out there, and we are not silly enough to think that we can kill all of them. So the phase we're in at the moment is protection of key assets, both economic assets for the tourism industry, but also ecological assets for the reefs that are most important through the resilience or connectivity network in kickstarting coral recovery after the outbreak ends. Of course, the holy grail remains, what can we achieve with better science, better surveillance? Can we, at the beginning of the next wave of outbreaks, actually suppress or at least geographically contain that wave? We'll only know that when the next wave begins. I want to talk about restoration, which I know is a particularly contentious, controversial subject. So at about the same time as GBRMPA was putting together the Reef Summit, which led to the blueprint, AIMS began the process of developing a partnership of several agencies, I think there are 7 of them there on the bottom of the screen, to develop a reef restoration and adaptation program. It is very early days in that program, but we are focused on protecting key ecological and economic functions and values of the reef. We are focused on techniques that are logistically feasible to deploy at scale, and at scale are affordable. I'm under no delusions that this is easy, but I am thinking about a world that is 1.5 degrees warmer, and I find it difficult to believe that our traditional management will be enough. I think we are going to need this stuff, or at the very least we are going to need to have thoroughly investigated all our options and know what will work and what will not. So AIMS and the scientists involved in the development of the program have developed a typology of different interventions. Under each of those categories sit a number of more specific categories that are currently being subjected to a critical and rigorous feasibility assessment. Let's be honest, I think we've all read lots of, I'm going to be polite and say interesting ideas about reef restoration. Some of them are clearly not feasible. Some of them are feasible, but perhaps only at very small scale for site management. But some of them do show potential with further R&D to deliver meaningful outcomes into the future, and those are the ones we are looking for in particular. The process of considering this feasibility is extremely complicated. I am just going to touch lightly on some of the issues that we are considering, but I need to really emphasize that A, the list is not exhaustive, and B, everything on this list is interconnected. And so it's critical that we think about it in a holistic way. I can never tire of saying this. We have to mitigate. Restoration is not, and never will be, a replacement for mitigation. I'm not going to say what I said again before, but we have to mitigate much more strongly than we are now. We need to consider different climate scenarios because we do not know what the future will bring. We need to think about and be clear about what is our objective in intervention: social and economic, biodiversity, ecosystem function. We need to understand that any intervention proposal or program of proposals will have risks and benefits, and we need to consider both. But there are also risks and benefits of action versus inaction. Not doing something could be riskier than doing it. We need to carefully consider biophysical feasibility at different scales under different climate scenarios. And in my personal view is no matter what tools we develop successfully, we should always adopt a less is more approach and only intervene to the minimum necessary to achieve our objectives. There is nothing wrong with developing intervention tools that we then choose to not use because we don't think we need them. There are a ton of human dimensions to this problem, to these questions. How will we work together with traditional owners and expect their rights, their values, their expectations? What about the varying stakeholders on the reef and their very diverse values that they hold for the Great Barrier Reef? As Tiffany just spoke about, are our governance structures currently adequate to protect the reef into the future, or do we need to change them? The balance between strong regulation to protect the reef versus facilitating new ideas that might deliver better outcomes, the broader societal license to operate in the community, and the cost effectiveness and funding for future restoration programs in conjunction with everything else we have to do to protect the reef. I'm going to finish by repeating myself. None of the things I have talked about stand alone. No one of the things I've talked about is enough to protect the reef. We have to do it all, in my view. I see these things as a pyramid. If you don't get the base right, the pinnacle will never work. The base of this pyramid is undoubtedly stronger action on climate change. The guts of this pyramid are improved marine park zoning and management, improved fisheries management, improved land management. And the pinnacle is what can we do with intervention? Across restoration, across crown of thorn starfish control, across other interventions, what do we think we can do into the future to deliver a better outcome for the Great Barrier Reef? I do believe what we said at the summit. I do believe we can protect the future of the Great Barrier Reef, but we are going to have to try a damn sight harder than we have been so far. Thank you.